Go back to verse 22. Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not in eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing who? Now, this issue here of fearing God. Notice again that the issue of fearing God in verse 22 in dealing with serving one's master in this capacity, this is God's will for the body of what? If you are in this station in life, what Paul is saying is that it's God's will for you to think about what is going on in your life, not as pleasing this human individual, but as being an example and going through it and doing what you're supposed to do, because you're not serving this human master, this human person that's over you. Who you're really serving is who? The Lord. Okay? Now, hold your hand there and go to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. And look at verse 21 again. We keep coming back to this verse, but this verse is governing a lot of the things that are being said here in Ephesians. And we've already seen time and time again that Colossians 3 and Ephesians 5 are parallel passages. Ephesians 5:1, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of who? We were talking about this last Sunday. We were talking about children, right? The issue here in the series of submissions that Paul is identifying in Ephesians 5 and Ephesians 6 do not have to do with you doing something for the admiration and praise of men, but doing it because that's what the Lord would have for you to do in that particular relationship. Okay? We saw what He would have in the relationship between a husband and a wife. We saw last Sunday what He would have in the relationship between children and parents. Now we're seeing what He would have you think and do in the work relationships in your life. Okay? And we're understanding them right now as they relate to this issue of servant and master. But in a few minutes we're going to make application to our current work that we perform as believers. Go to Ephesians 6. Look at verse 5. Notice what it says. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, notice, in singleness of heart, as unto who? Christ. So the issue is serving Christ through that relationship. Okay? That's the issue here. Verse 6. Not with eye service as men pleasers, as a servant, but as the servants of Christ, notice, doing the will of God from what? Now, you need to not misunderstand these verses. These verses are not saying that it is God's will for somebody to be a servant or a slave. Okay? These verses are saying that if you find yourself in this position, if you find yourself in this station, this is how God the Holy Spirit would have you think about that living under grace. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Okay? Now, verse 7, with goodwill doing service as to who? As to the Lord, and not to who? Men. Now, one final point about that. The relation of Christian slaves to their masters was to be governed by their relationship to the Lord. Slaves who had a single heart focused on the Lord and who continuously feared the Lord would meet Paul's qualification for continuously obeying who? The Lord. Okay? Now, let's back up from that a minute. We've understood what they say in the context in which, we've understood the verses in the context in which they were written. No, we live in a society now where, and thankfully so, where that slave-master relationship does not exist anymore. Okay? Are there still places in the world where it does exist? Absolutely there are. Okay? But we do live in a society and an economic system in the United States where an employee-employer relationship still exists. Okay? If you think about your life, you know that there is somebody that you work for or people that work for you. Right? And so all the doctrine here that Paul is directing specifically to that all still applies to us as we contemplate our work life. Okay? What I mean by that is this. If you are a believer, Should you only be working when the boss is in the room? What's the answer? No. It's a bad testimony, isn't it? I mean, if you're going around your place of work telling everybody that you're a Christian and that you're a believer, oh, and hey, come to Grace Life Bible Church and blah, 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 whatever else, and then the supervisor leaves the room and you're sitting there, on your shovel eating a donut and drinking your coffee, and as soon as you see him coming, you throw it down and act like you're working, that's not a good testimony, is it? That is serving men as eye pleasers, not in singleness of heart, fearing who? Fearing the Lord, okay? You all understand what I'm saying. And the temptation for us in our work life is for us to only work as hard as we need to, when we have to, and not do all diligence before the Lord. Now, you might be able to pull one over on your boss, right? But who's still there watching? God is, okay? And so, these are just practical truths that still apply to us no matter what kind of economic system you're living under, or no matter, when you're living. These principles are still binding. All the lessons here still apply to the work relationship. And I want to say this also. It is my belief that God is not giving anybody a job. Okay? You can lay on the couch till your eyes bug out of your head and pray for a job, and God will not supernaturally deposit a job in your lap. Okay? You need to be actively seeking a job. You need to be checking the newspaper, checking the internet. You need to be going and getting the education that you need to have the job that you want. Okay? God is not in the business of just waving His magic wand and zapping you with a job. Okay? But in your job, God does have a will for you. Whether you're digging ditches, picking up the trash, or working in a bank, His will for you, no matter which one of those jobs that you have, His will for you in those particular instances is for you to follow these verses. Right? To understand that you are serving the Lord in your place of work and vocation, not that guy that's over you. All right? Now, if you'll think about it from that point of view, it may change the way you view your job. Because work for most people is drudgery, isn't it? I just got to go to work again. I'm just going to, I know, I'm there too sometimes. Okay? It's just the way it is, right? Now, so when we think about our work relationships, we need to think about them in light of these verses. Notice what it says, Ephesians 6. You're there, look at verse 6 again. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of God, servants of Christ, doing the will of God from what? The attitude that we ought to have about our jobs is not one of, oh man, got to go to stupid work again. Okay? The attitude should be, first of all, an attitude of thanksgiving that number one, you have a job. Okay? As we all know, there's nothing certain in our current economy, and if you have a job, you should be grateful for the job that you have, right? And number two, you need to view your job. If you're going to view your job the way God would have you to view your job, it's going to be as a place where you go to serve Him. Okay? For most of you, I would say that if you think about your life, the first place that you run across lost people that aren't saved, is not at home, and it's not at church. It's where? It's at your job. Your job, for lack of a better purpose, is your mission field. That is where you are an ambassador of Jesus Christ. As you go to that place of residence, a place of occupation, where you do the thing that you were hired to do, that for most people is the primary place where they are going to be an ambassador of Christ. Because if you think about your place of occupation and where you work, you walk in there and you may be the only believer in the whole institution. You can have an impact at that place of work for Christ by having the right attitude and doing things the way God would have you to do them.